Okay, well, we've been gerrymandering, or we're jerry-rigging the agenda. Don't worry, it's not an election. So the next item we're going to do is number 6, which is the budget report. Ms. Burns. Give you a second to get sorted out over there. Ms. Jones did have to go to a conflicting engagement, but she will be back tomorrow morning, bright and early, and we will finish the legislative agenda. Also, for the benefit of board members, when we talked about reviewing that bill, the last bill we were, XX, the one about child custody evaluations, we've now become aware through both staff and through the California Psychological Association that the bill has been amended to restrict the scope of it to only licensed psychologists and psychiatrists. So really the only issue that's still pending for us to discuss, I would have guessed, is the 3 hours. And we can return to that tomorrow. I'm not trying to, yeah, sure. So, Ms. Burns.
So the Board of Psychology has a budget of $4,938,000 in the governor's budget for fiscal year 2016-2017, and $4,979,000 in the governor's proposed budget for the fiscal year 2017-2018. As of yesterday, neither one of those bills had passed. It is the 15th, so you should see movement today on bills. Currently the board's budget change proposal for the temporary Staff Services Manager 1 and Staff Services Manager 2 positions are in that budget bill and should make it through the legislative process. You'll also note that the budget augmentation for the Attorney General for the ongoing costs in future years is also included in that budget. So our increased costs for the AG should also be covered, so we should see a little less of the large red amounts on the right-hand side. So if you want to take a look, if you want to take attachment A on the budget report, you'll see that the surplus is now 3.7% is what is expected. So we're back in that good range of 3 to 7% or 3 to 6%, where the DCA is not concerned about that. Some of the things to highlight, which might have just stuck out to you, is that IA with DOI Direct. That's because our MOU was not part of the budget. So the DOI investigations are part of an MOU. They weren't built into the budget, so it may look.
Can we use less acronyms and more full?
Absolutely. So on
I know that's Sacramento speak, but not all of us speak it.
Sorry. The budget report, so that's attachment A. And if you go third subsection down, there is a line item. It's a large $307,423. So our memorandum of understanding with the Division of Investigation is not part of the budgeted amount. It was a memorandum after that, so it's not built into the budget. That's why it looks so large. It's not that we're $307,000 over an already allotted amount. There was no allotted amount there to pull from, so that's just the total.
And just IA means interagency agreement.
So in case that stuck out to people, I know that was the first thing. I'm like, ooh, that's a big little, what's that, 307,000? So again, it wasn't originally built in the budget. That's why it's sitting out there on the side. Other than that, not too concerned about that. Attachment B, of course, is on the discretionary versus non-discretionary. And the big point here is, again, that there's a whole lot of non-discretionary budget items and very little that's in the discretionary part for us to deal with. So that's the only one of that. And then the fund condition looks good. We're still slated for our general fund loan repayment in 2018-2019. And that's about it for that one. Everything looks good on that fund condition. And then we've asked in these wonderful, beautiful charts that John Burke helped us get. The picture we're trying to paint here is to show you that although the fund balance comparison of what's budgeted may look problematic, the actuals are what you really want to look at, and the actuals look pretty well. And that when we look at the expenditure comparison and the revenue comparison, you'll notice that we typically budget to expend more than we actually do, and we also budget to bring in less than we currently do. So it has a little bit of a conservative look on the revenue side and a just-in-case look on the spending side. So that's why we usually end up in a pretty good fund condition. And we work really hard with Mark Ito to make sure everything's in order. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Are there any comments from the board on the budget report? Any comments from the public? Hearing none, I will thank you, Ms. Burns, for your report. And we will move on now to the executive officer's report.
Included in the meeting materials is the executive officer report, starting with the DCA update that was provided by Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations, Christine Lawley. And I appreciate her addition to the report. It's helpful to know what the department is currently working on and priorities of the administration. I've also included a staffing update, and I just want to welcome Miss McCochran to the Board of Psychology. Welcome back, actually. She started out as an office technician for the board, was promoted to staff service analyst in our licensing unit, and is now currently an associate government program analyst doing CE and renewals coordination for the central services unit. So welcome. We have two current vacancies. We have the renewal technician's position, as well as a seasonal technician position. This seasonal technician is going to be filling in the educational information that is now currently available in Breeze for those licensees that were licensed prior to 1999. We talked a little bit about this in our newsletter, so we'll be filling in any kind of gaps on qualifying degrees that were not put into the Breeze system at the time. So that is the DCA and Board of Psychology update, and I'm happy to answer any questions. We can go on.
Okay. Oh, well, maybe we will go to the license. We'll start the licensing report in any event.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks. So for licensing report, is item 10. I'll wait till everybody's there. Ready? Okay, great. So we have our application processing time frames as on the memo. So right now, our average processing time frame for psychologist applications is average 8 business days, and for psych assistant is average 2 business days. And then for registered psychologists, at the time that when we were doing the reports, there were no outstanding registered psychologist application waiting to be processed, so you see not a statistics there, and that's the reason why. And our current updated licensing data for psychologists for the 16th to 17th year is 20,580 for psychologists. Yes.
I just have a question. A question about this. Tell me what inactive psychologists do.
So inactive psychologists is they're renewing as inactive, so they're not seeing clients, but they're still holding their license.
Okay. Thanks. And we have somewhere else which of those are active and which are inactive, right? And a later?
Later.
I mean, how many are?
Yeah, at a later time.
Yeah, that's what I thought we had. I saw it in there, so, okay, thanks.
Okay, no problem. So for going on, for registered psychologists, we have our 220 registered right now, and then about 1,400 psych assistant. And also, I want to give an update regarding the consolidation process for the psych assistant registration. So as of end of April, we have consolidated everybody who used to hold multiple registrations, that they're only going with one registration now on. So from now on, they can go to work and gain hours and the necessary experience towards licensure under one registration number. So that will be increase their mobility. And also, we have, regarding pathways to licensure, I'm just going to give an overview, and then I'll hand it off to Dr. Horn and Dr. Phillips to share the experience regarding the stakeholder meeting. So a little bit background of that is that we have been reviewing the statutes and regulations that affecting the pathways to licensure in the licensing committee, and then this May we held our first stakeholder meeting in Northern California in Sacramento. So, and then we'll have another one in August 22nd in the LA area. And then we will have a follow-up licensing committee meeting in the fall, which is in October, to rectify all the comments and then to make a final recommendation and present it to the board at the next board meeting following that licensing committee meeting. So I'm just going to hand off to Dr. Horn. You can start with your experience.
Thank you. Let me ask a question first. Do we have the Southern California location yet?
We know that it will be in the LA area, but the contract, we should be get it done very soon. And
Okay.
then we'll be updated that, and then we'll also let all the stakeholders know where it's gonna be. We'll send a separate invitation letter, just like we did for the May meeting.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so we had the first meeting, and of course, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Phillips, to chime in when, you know, anything you want to chime in about. So, but Dr. Phillips and I were there mainly to answer any questions that they were, or clarify what the licensing committee's concerns were, or questions were, or why we were proposing or putting some things forward to the public. That's why we were there. Otherwise, we didn't conduct the meeting, we didn't participate in the meeting, except in those ways. I think the meeting went extremely well. We got through all the questions that we had as a committee. We had a nice variety of licensees there, people in training, people who were just, I don't want to say just, but, you know, just licensees. They weren't involved in any special programs or anything like that. And so we just had psychologists, licensed psychologists from, I'd say, a whole bunch of different areas, which was really nice. And they provided really good food for thought as well going forward. And we're very excited. And let me say that the Solid folks who conducted the stakeholder meeting, Ms. Chung, everybody was, all the people who were there really did a really good job. So we couldn't have been more happy. And I think one of the things it did that we didn't realize it might do so much is a lot of people, or I'll say a number of people. How many folks were there? About 25. Okay, so we had 25 folks there. And I'd say a significant number of them came up and thanked us for doing it, thanked us for, allowing their input at this part of the process. Several came up and said, wow, I didn't realize how much you do. And that was good, too. It was very eye-opening and illuminating for those folks. So we're excited about heading to Southern California and getting feedback from people down south. So.
Yeah, I would just concur that I thought the meeting went very well and was very well received by the participants. My only slight disappointment was that there weren't more training directors from clinics or clinical directors from clinics. So we're hoping that Division 2 shows up in numbers at our next meeting so that we can get more of that input. But I think people found it very helpful. And it also led to some interesting philosophical discussions, which we had to cut short at points. But what's a psychologist? What should be the scope of what a psychologist does? So I thought it was a day well spent.
Thank you so much. And then I will also share with you that we have updated the licensing population report, which is attachment A, to reflect the status code regarding the license to be included on this report only. So these codes are exclusively used by our board. Yes, if you have any questions, you may ask me. Yes.
Could you remind us what delinquent can do and not do?
Okay, so delinquent is delinquent is a term that for internal use and because of the system, how it was created. So delinquent actually means an expired license. So when they come to do expire and then they didn't renew in time, and then it will show delinquent on our end. But in the public license lookup page on the BREEZE system, where everybody can look up a license, it will show expired. So essentially it means expired.
Any other questions from board members? Any comments from the public? Hearing none? Oh, please.
Just a comment regarding psychological assistance. Melody Schaefer, Division 2, CPA. Just a comment on the instructions for psychological assistance that the board might want to consider adding something about the change in the fees of not having to any longer include $40. I think I spoke to you on the phone about this, asking if we needed to for someone who already has their PSB number and is adding another psychologist supervisor, and you'd inform me, no, it is not necessary to include a $40 fee. However, on the instruction sheet online on your website, it doesn't state that. So that may help clarify for others.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other public comment? We're now going to break in order to allow the participants in the petition hearing to get organized and set up before we start that hearing at 3 p.m. So you've got about a 10-minute break.
Regarding Jennifer Tanzi, you're Ms. Tanzi? Okay, welcome. Anything we need to discuss before we open the record? Let's go ahead and open the record. The hearing is now open in the matter of Jennifer H. Tanzi. The case number is I got the case number duplicated. Let me get it. It's 600-2017-000173. The OAH case number is 2017-050419. This is a petition for early termination of probation before the Board of Psychology, and today is June 15th, 2017, and it's 3 p.m. in Ontario, California. My name is Matthew Goldsby. I'll be the administrative law judge for the hearing. Let me get appearances, please.
Good afternoon, Cindy M. Lopez, Deputy Attorney General for the board.
Thank you. And Ms. Tanzi, can you state and spell your name, please?
Dr. Jennifer Tanzi, T like in Tom, A-N-S-E-Y.
Were you expecting an attorney here to represent you? No. Okay, well, let me explain to you a little bit about how the hearing works so you understand how to follow along. The first thing I'm going to have done is that the There are basically three stages to any of these hearings. The first is for opening statements, and I'm going to have the Attorney General make a brief opening statement. And you can make an opening statement as well, but I'm going to put you under oath, and we're going to hear from you in narrative style. I'm going to let you tell the board whatever it is you feel is important in support of your petition. When you're done, the deputy may have some questions in cross-examination. I'm going to allow the board to ask you questions. I might have some questions for you. You'll also be allowed to present any evidence that you've brought. And if you have brought anyone to testify, we would hear from them. The Attorney General is going to present some documents. If you have any objections to any of the documents, let me know. You do have the right to object. I'm not anticipating anyone to testify against you, but if there is anyone who testifies against you, you do have the right of cross-examination, so I'll give you the opportunity to cross-examine. Since you'll be testifying in narrative style, we may not need a closing statement, but I'll give you the last word. And you can sum up whatever the evidence shows and what decision you're hoping the board reaches. All right? Do you have any questions about the procedures? All right. Ms. Lopez, did you want to make an opening statement?
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Do you want me to do an opening statement first, or you want me to do the exhibits first?
Let's get your opening statement first.
Okay. I'm so used to standing up, so I'll sit down since I have to use this microphone. So this case, the accusation was filed in August of 2012, and it arose out of several letters that Dr. Tansey wrote on behalf of a friend of hers regarding a child custody case. So there were 3 letters involved. Letter 1, the purpose was to identify relevant mental health concerns about the minor and the mother. Letter number 2 was a letter that the father, so the father was the friend of Dr. Tansey, he could give to his attorney in Arkansas regarding the progress of the minor. And Dr. Tansey claims that she did not intend for the father to give this letter to anyone other than his attorney. This letter talked about an alleged kidnapping by the mother of the minor, and Dr. Tansey said it was her professional opinion that the mom should have no contact with the minor. And letter number 3, again, this was to bring the father's attorney up to date regarding whether the minor should go see her mother in Arkansas. And Dr. Tansey said a visit with the mom would harm the minor. Not only were these letters given to a court who made child custody decisions, but the most egregious part is that Dr. Tansey never, ever met the mother, never spoke to her, never met with her. Yet she opined in all 3 of these letters what a danger this mother was to her minor daughter. The expert found several departures, failing to protect confidential information, so these letters were used in a court case. By the way, as an aside, as of today, I am not sure that mother has been able to see her daughter. Another departure was expressing opinions about this mother without ever personally evaluating her. Trusting the word of the minor and father. So I had talked about in one of these letters, there was a mention of a kidnapping. That was according to the father and the minor. There was never any evidence about that, and this was also a father who was an abuser, by the way. The expert also found that she took on a forensic role as well as a clinical role. Dr. Tansey was put on probation in January 2015. She agreed to 3 years probation with a variety of terms. One of those terms was that she would not do any more child custody evaluations. However, once probation is over, of course, she can do that. And it is her burden to justify why probation should be terminated at this time. So I have several exhibits that I'd like to be marked and received into evidence. I gave Dr. Tansey a copy, and I understand she already had one. So exhibit number 1 is the jurisdictional documents, which is the decision and the order, and I would ask that that be marked and received as exhibit 1.
I'll mark the pleadings described by counsel as Exhibit 1 for identification is being offered for jurisdictional purposes only. Authority to resolve and grant your petition, certain procedures need to be followed. These documents that are marked as Exhibit 1 are being introduced to show that those procedures were followed. Do you have any objections to Exhibit number 1? All right, Exhibit number 1 will be received.
Exhibit number 2 is the notice of hearing, just letting Dr. Tansey know that the hearing is today and where it's at. I would ask that be marked and received as Exhibit 2.
I'll mark the notice of hearing as Exhibit 2. Any objections to Exhibit number 2? And we need to hear you.
No.
Exhibit number 2 is admitted.
Exhibit number 3 is the certification of licensure, and there is an online copy of this from Breeze, which is a website, state website. I would ask that this be marked and received as Exhibit 3.
I'll mark the documents as Exhibit number 3 for identification. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 3 is admitted.
Exhibit 4 is Dr. Tansey's petition, and I would ask that that be marked and received as Exhibit 4.
I'll mark the petition as Exhibit number 4 for identification. Any objections to Exhibit 4?
No.
Exhibit 4 is admitted.
The next exhibit are investigation reports and a variety of attachments. I would ask that that be marked as Exhibit 5 and received into evidence.
I'll mark the investigation report as Exhibit number 5. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 5 is admitted.
Also, I did want to add, some of these exhibits are redacted. So these are in terms of public protection. So some of these, there might be black markings in them.
That's perfectly fine and would be expected, so thank you. Go ahead.
The next exhibit is a probation report dated May 8th, 2017. I would ask that that be marked and received as Exhibit 6.
I'll mark the probation report as Exhibit 6 for identification. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 6 is admitted.
The next exhibit is a quarterly report dated June 30th, 2016. I would ask that that be marked and received as Exhibit 7.
The quarterly report of compliance is marked as Exhibit 7 for identification. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 7 is admitted.
The next is a quarterly report of compliance dated September 30th, 2016. I'd ask that that be marked and received as Exhibit 8.
The quarterly report described by counsel is marked as Exhibit 8 for identification. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 8 is admitted.
Next is another quarterly report of compliance dated December 29th, 2016. I would ask that that be marked and received as Exhibit 9.
This quarterly report is marked as Exhibit 9 for identification. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 9 is admitted.
And the last one is another quarterly report of compliance dated March 31st, 2017. I'd ask that that be marked and received as Exhibit 10.
This quarterly report is marked as Exhibit 10 for identification. Any objections?
No.
Exhibit 10 is admitted. Any other evidence?
No.
All right. Well, then let's turn to Dr. Tansey. First of all, let me have you raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so as I described earlier, I'm going to allow you to testify in narrative style, meaning you can
Okay.
tell the board anything that you want in whatever sequence you feel you want to go in, and when you're done,
Okay.
we may have some questions for you. So go ahead and tell us what it is you
Okay.
want to say today.
Well, I'm not sure if I should counteract anything that she said, because obviously facts get skewed sometimes, and conclusions become, conclusion. In other words, I don't agree with everything that she's saying, but I understand what happened, and I understand how it happened. And I think that the most important thing I understand is that, I definitely did not do due diligence in making sure that this father did not send any communication to any courts or anything. I stated that on the outset. I was very clear. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm not a forensic, psychologist. I was very clear about it, and I was not aware of the custody dispute to the level it was. I had no idea.
his daughter came to me literally shaking every single session. In fact, I tried to get her mother's name from her, and it took her 2 to 3 sessions. I mean, I knew her name, but I couldn't really say it because every time I did, she would start shaking. I think I made egregious mistakes in being a bit biased and not taking the time and not really doing some due diligence to find out if the mother was in the country. It was under my understanding that the mother was not in the country, or she was flying back and forth from Arkansas back to Chile. And so at that point, I agree with, what it's being said here in terms of what it looks like, but had I put confidentiality, had I put, on the bottom of my, and this is when, we had email communication where people were just now starting to put the confidentiality on the bottom of it, and had I done that, I would have, been in a much different state today. And I think that I've learned a lot from this. I've learned an enormous amount. I never intended those letters to go to any court. I do not, I'm a psychotherapist. I don't even want to do anything that's court related, if at all possible. I did not portray myself as having competence at all in a court situation. Honestly, what happened is that this woman was shaking so much, and her father kept badgering me, write a letter to the lawyer so he knows what to say, in a court proceeding. And I was like, well, I don't feel comfortable with that. I said, but I can let him know, how she's doing in therapy. And basically, I think I made many mistakes. I mean, I think I look back now and I realize that I should not have even written the letter. I should have, again, let him know my limits of my competence and my limits of my ability to, portray myself in that way. And I wasn't actually trying to. I think what happened is that I'm a therapist by nature, and the supportive and the advocate in me. Honestly, if you had seen this girl, you would have understood that she shook and shook and shook. Now, I know now I need to get more information. I mean, I know now that I need to get a much bigger picture than the one I had. And at the time, I was caught in being her advocate. She was getting bullied at school. Her legs were paralyzed. She couldn't, she was having all kinds of doctor problems because she was so bound up with some fear. I was doing PTSD, trauma work with her, and that's what I was doing. And unfortunately, I overstepped my bounds, I guess, in terms of thinking that I was being an advocate, not trying to portray myself in a position where I was, when I said professional opinion, what I was trying to do was just say, this is my work with her. This is the data that I see. This is what I hear her saying to me. And I tried to call her, get her mom's phone number at one point in time, and she said, if you do that, I can't come back, I was in a conundrum. I see now that there's things that I can do. I see now that I would hold my limits a lot better. I see now that I would be a lot more objective and take a step back. I also see that, I have redone my whole file. I have 6 pages of limits to confidentiality and, arbitration and what I will do and I won't do and what my competence is and what my competence isn't. And I really feel that I've really learned from this in terms of my ability to pull back and to really be much more cautious, much more mindful about what my role is and the boundaries of that role. And at any rate, so I had no intention of that letter going to the judge or a court. I was very, very clear that it should not go, and you're right, I should not have put in, I did say alleged kidnapping, but that was the biographical story I got from both the father and the daughter. And I did have, he did have paperwork for full custody, so, at that point, my role as a therapist was, I guess, just, I was not holding myself to a place where I was looking out for the best interests even of the mother. And I've really learned you can't you have to believe your clients, but you can't, you have to take a step back, and you have to have a better, a more wider point of view. You have to remain objective, and this person really did pull my heart in. She was suffering deeply, deeply, deeply. And in fact, they had left Arkansas, supposedly, allegedly, because the mother was stalking them, and at any rate. So I think that, I realize I cannot give an opinion about any individual who I do not have any data for. I really see that, and I have learned about that. And I do not want to provide any opinion that's in any psychological, legal situation either. Any custody, I probably will never do custody evaluations, but at this point in time, that's one of the things I've learned. I've also taken a lot of steps to remain professionally objective. In fact, I've stayed in touch with my profession through a lot of CE classes, conferences, consulting. I have way more accountability into place. I had just moved down to Los Angeles. I had opened up an office by myself. There was some personal tragedy that had occurred, and so it was a pretty difficult time, but it doesn't negate any of my responsibility, and I'm not saying it does. It just was a set of circumstances that I look back now that I needed better accountability. I had a very successful practice in South Orange County, and I had tons of accountability, tons of consultation, and tons of colleagues. And, at that point, I wish that I had, brought some of it with me at that time. It was a little bit of a difficult situation for me. But overall, I feel like my documentation is better. I have adopted a mindset to look out for foreseeable conflicts, things that I think are going to happen down the road. And I've really adopted a mindset that I want to be a good therapist and practice within the limits and the scope of my limitations and my ability and my competence. And I really mean that. I really have taken that to heart. And I am deeply sorry that this has come about. The mother has seen the daughter, and before the case was closed, the daughter and the father told me that she was still continuing to be a very difficult situation. But at the same time, I understand that you have to be able to consider all points of view, and that's one of the biggest things I have learned. And also the fact that I needed to consult with another professional at the time. I really needed to take a step back and consult when I was feeling that check in my heart. When I was feeling like this is making me feel uncomfortable, I really needed to take a step back. And that's where I have really grown and I have learned. So, yeah, I wasn't attempting to interfere whatsoever with a custody situation. Honestly, that is not who I am. That wouldn't be what I would do. I, again, was being an advocate, and I was being supportive of what I thought was support for my client. And every other woman in her life had abandoned her, and it was hard, to see what she had to go through. And unfortunately, I got shafted in the process of it somewhat. But I'm grateful to be here. I'm actually really grateful that I've had these last 3 years. That's actually it's been a lot more than 2 or 3 years because of the tragedy in my family. So, because I had to put things off, but I'm really grateful. I actually feel like I'm a much better psychologist. I feel like I have probably stronger boundaries and know the law probably better than most of my colleagues at this point. I've taken 4 or 5 ethics classes. I passed the Washington State Boards first time around. I took the CPLEE and passed that first time around. And so, I've done due diligence, definitely, to know my laws and know my ethics and to hold myself accountable to those. And it actually feels good. And I actually feel really good about it. So I don't know if I have anything else to say. Yeah, I really understand that there's limits to my professional opinion, and had I had to do it over, obviously things would be much different at this point in time. And I can appreciate, what you're saying about it being possibly hurtful for the mother. I really do understand that. I do. Next time around, I will definitely be holding a much different stance and be consulting with people. I'd probably get legal counsel at that point, too. I would want to make sure. And I would just honestly keep my paperwork now defines very explicitly what my role will be and what my role won't be. And I don't really have a problem. I mean, that feels good to me. That's where I function best. And that's where I want to stay. So, yeah, I have no intention of, reinventing myself. So, yeah, I think that's probably all I need to say.
All right, Ms. Lopez, do you have any questions?
Just a couple. I know, I hate it when lawyers always say just a couple, and then like 25 minutes later, they're still asking questions. So I promise it'll just be a couple. So Dr. Tanzi, I'm looking at your petition. So this is at page 29. Well, it's marked as 29.
I have it in here.
It asks you how you would handle the situation which led to your discipline were it to happen today. And you answered, I would ensure my documents would all have correct documentation according to the laws and standards and ethical guidelines. So I'm curious, because that answers part of it, but what about the part where you made opinions about someone who you had never met? You don't mention that in this answer.
Well, why? I knew I was going to probably be coming to this, and so I didn't. And the person supervising me said basically, what they have asked me to do. I kind of stuck to what they had asked him to do, was make sure just my records were okay. And that was the scope of what his job was under probation. And so that's what I kept to in that. But as we've all witnessed today, I very much have thought this through and have also come to conclusions about my professional opinion and the limits to it, and my need to make sure that I'm practicing within those limits and within the competence that I've been trained in. And that's, yes, I mean, so that's where that comes from.
Okay, so this is along the same lines. This is at page 33. It says, why do you feel your probation should be terminated early? And towards the bottom, you say, I have put into place security measures that will ensure my documents sent through email or any other mode of communication cannot be taken and used for another's purpose than what is agreed upon between myself and my client. So, I mean, I hate to beat a dead horse, but again, it seems like you're kind of missing the point here. You just talk about...
Well, again, it was...
Can I finish?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so you just talk about the documentation part of this, which is one thing, but in here, you don't mention anything about what you've learned in terms of evaluating people before you make an opinion, such as that a woman shouldn't get custody of her child.
No, I agree with you. And the reason I didn't is that section actually was optional. And so when I sent it in, I think it was either Barbara Tanner or, anyway, one of the people at the board said, well, why don't you write a short little thing? And so what I did was I wrote basically what the supervisor that's supervising me wrote, because I knew that I was going to come and explain, more fully here. I wasn't trying to be short, or I wasn't trying to be disrespectful at all. I was just trying to be a part of the process and, know that I'm going to come here and share, more in detail and more, with more elaboration. Oops. So that's where that came from. Honestly, I didn't realize that I need any.
Well, so the board is here, obviously, their first, the first thing they're thinking about is public protection.
Yes,
And,
I understand.
So they need to make sure that the things that led up to the discipline in this case don't happen again. So let me talk a little bit about that with you. So earlier you said I wrote down that you admitted your bias. What did you mean by that?
Well, with my client coming in I saw her 2 to 3 times a week, shaking and not being able to hardly talk at all. I got drawn into being an advocate and creating a supportive environment for her. And like I said, there were no other women in her life. Every other woman supposedly had abandoned her, and I was hearing a lot. And so my bias was for my client. And I think that what I mean by that is that at this point in time, what I've learned is to take a step back and realize I'm much more cognizant of having a bias. And sometimes when you have people in your practice that are really, really hurting, that have gone through what allegedly horrendous tragedies and horrendous moments, that's what I meant. I got drawn into that bias, and I see that that was a mistake.
You also mentioned that had you put confidentiality at the bottom of these letters or emails, I'm not sure which one, that you feel like you wouldn't be in this situation. So again, it seems like in what you said today and in your answers and in your written work, you're really focusing on this whole idea of the letters being misused, which of course they were. But I'm hoping you realize now, I think, that there's other issues
Yes.
that led to this? Okay.
I do. Yes. But thank you for pointing that out.
All right, now, the last thing, I'm not sure if the board members noticed, but I'm sure they did. You said that you got shafted. You used the word
I know.
shafted.
I
And
should have used that.
usually, they're looking for remorse. They're looking for acceptance of responsibility. And I'm wondering what you meant by I got shafted.
Actually, thank you for bringing that up, because the minute I said that, I thought, well, that's, that was probably an inappropriate word to use. What I meant, just give me a second. I gave a lot to this case, and I ended up seeing her pro bono because her father was, he was a retired from a United States service person. And he wasn't the friend was a friend of his. And so what I meant by that is that I gave and stepped up to the plate in ways that I thought I should, which, now we know were not always correct and with, the healthiest and under what I needed to be. And so what I meant by that was that they couldn't sit before the board because, or the court, because according to them, they had to leave the state again because the wife was stalking and hassling, and she did some supposedly destructive things. And so they were, my lawyers talked to them quite a bit, and we were going to get a tele-deposition, but even that, they refused to be in the same room as this woman. So the father and the daughter couldn't speak for me in terms of my intentions, because I made it very clear. I did make it very clear to both of them, and he was very, very sorry about that, but he wouldn't come before the court to say it as long as she was in the courtroom, and she wouldn't either. So that's what I meant, is that, it felt like the rug got ripped out from underneath me at that point. But no, I feel a lot of remorse for this situation. I feel an enormous amount of vulnerability for the mother. I think, again, I feel like I have made many mistakes that I wish that what I now know is to not do those same things over again and adhere to the limits of my competence and the scope of my training. And also, I think, honestly, to listen to that place inside me that knows that something is being, pulled, I've never been in a custody dispute. I've never been in a custody or any kind of case as that. And I do feel like, in looking back, I was manipulated a little bit, and that's my own fault for being manipulated. But I do feel that kind of happened, but I don't put blame on anybody. I put the responsibility on me to have done a better job. And maybe had I talked to the wife, or maybe had I taken a better step back and consulted and got really some support at that time, it would have turned out better for me. And so, but that's what I meant by shafted.
I have nothing further.
All right, well, let's now turn to the board and see if they have any questions. Dr. Phillips, you want to start?
Sure. I'd like to refer you again back to your petition at page, it's been date stamped 28028. Do you have the exhibits?
Okay. Where is it? Page 28, okay. Okay.
I want you to particularly look at question number 3 where it says, was it your behavior which led to your license being disciplined? And you answered, no, not applicable. Could you explain to me what you were thinking when you answered?
You know, I don't know what I was thinking when I look at that now.
Wasn't it your behavior
I
that
think
led
I
to you
was,
being
I
disciplined?
think I was thinking of, like, the sexual conduct or something like that. I mean, I was defining behavior, I think, differently. Yeah, because I know, I mean, I feel like I feel responsible for that. So,
Okay, let me ask you a different question. Can you tell me in very simple terms, just bullet points, what did you do wrong? Because we want to know that you know
Yeah.
what you did wrong.
what I did wrong, first of all, was writing those letters. And one of them was to a school, you know, to help her get the necessary IUP that she needed. I think, secondly, well, I was writing those letters. I feel like I did that wrong. Secondly, I don't think I contacted the mom. I didn't make a concerted enough effort to get a hold of the mom and hear another side of things. Thirdly, you know, I let the father, you know, convince me that these letters were necessary for my client's well-being and to help present a case for for his lawyer. And so, and thirdly, I don't think I held to my, I let myself be drawn into an area that was not my expertise, was not in my competence, was not in my training. And like I said earlier, out of my thought of being supportive. And so, am I answering your question?
Well, you are, but I'm thinking more in terms of the ethics code. What ethical prohibitions did you violate in
Oh,
the actions that
practicing
you took?
outside of my scope of training and also providing written data, you know, written words that where I did not have any observable data. You know, I didn't ever interview her. So I practiced really outside of my scope if you look at it from that point of view in terms of I was saying things about the mother that I could not back up because I had not talked to her or I did not have any other information. You know, I guess I could have called, I did try to call the therapist in Arkansas, but I never got a call back, the therapist that they saw in Arkansas. But the bottom line of it is yeah, I did not, I'm sorry, my head's getting a little bit confused. It's
Okay.
overwhelming.
Well,
But
let me ask you a different question. If you go to the next page of your petition,
Okay.
item number 5, it said, how do you think your actions, inactions, or issues led to the discipline may have affected patients and or their family members? And your answer was, caused my client to suffer tremendously. And that was the extent at the time that you were filling out the petition of what you understood
Well, you
as
know,
to what
my understanding
harm
about,
you did?
I'm sorry, my understanding about the petition when I talked to the board was just fill it out and then you'll come down here and you'll explain everything. I didn't realize I had to be really detailed in the petition, and I apologize for that. Had I known that, I would have done what I've done today. I have copious notes, copious thoughts and journaling of, you know, what I did and didn't do. So I apologize for that.
So it didn't occur to you to write down that it hurt mom, the mother?
Not at that moment, no.
Okay. On page 31 of the petition, question number 2 says, how often did you meet and how long was each session? This is about probation monitoring.
Mhm.
And you said monthly for 15 minutes.
Right.
What does your probation require?
Just looking at my, my file. No talking about clients, no talking about
What was the length
psychotherapy.
of time that was required per month?
An hour, but when we talked to my probation guy talked to the board, we looked at my files, and I did not have a big client load at that time at all.
So your probation monitor simply looked at your files to see if you're meeting record-keeping guidelines?
Right.
He didn't talk to you about multiple relationships?
No,
He didn't talk to you about diagnosing people you had no data for?
that wasn't in the petition.
What, did you understand when you stipulated to the probation that those were the things that you were saying were violations?
Yes, I did. I did understand
Okay.
that. I did understand that, but his understanding, when he talked to the board, was to look at my files and make sure that they were in order. And so I felt like I couldn't, he communicated to the board, not me, at that point. I did talk about, certain things. I had, consent forms in my files for me to talk to him about it. But he said, I'm not supposed to talk to you about your clients. And so I left it at that.
A condition of your probation was that you're to pay a certain amount to
Right.
the Board of Psychology, correct?
Mhm.
Have you paid that amount in full?
I believe I almost have, yeah. Yeah.
Because the reports would indicate in here that you still had over $1,000 outstanding.
Well, you get to pay it in 2 different installments. I just paid a whole bunch of money right away. I just had this
More
talk.
recently?
Oh, yeah, very recently. I think I'm all actually up to date. I should have brought that paperwork.
So you've paid that amount in full?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I don't have any further questions at this time. Yeah.
All right, that's, why don't we go around the room, and if, Mr. Foodie, did you have any questions? No questions? Okay. We've got Dr. Erickson. Do you have any questions?
Yes, one, at least, aside from the letters that didn't have confidential on them that should perhaps have not been written, we talked about that, the term that was used was stepping up to the plate. How would you step up differently if you do this over again? In terms of your treatment and handling the father and the daughter, and how would you do things differently?
Well, first of all, I think I would get consultation right away. I think when, because that was not a part of the original agreement, that I was going to write letters or be involved in any kind of, custody. In fact, I explicitly said no. I mean, I knew I didn't want to be. So I would get consultation once that was starting to be introduced, and on such a panicked basis especially. I think the second thing, I just lost my thought. I'm sorry. It was a good thought.
Do you think the diagnosis
I would recommend that he get a forensic psychologist. I would recommend that he would go through the appropriate channels to get the right people to help him.
Well, that sounds good, and getting consultation. Do you think there was more about the daughter you might have, in terms of diagnostic factors that might have helped you step up differently in terms of your work with her?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
And Dr. Erickson, can we make sure you're being recorded? If you could get the microphone a little closer to you. I'm not sure you're being picked up.
That's important, thank you. Do you think, it sounds to me like the daughter was very manipulative as well. You said you were manipulated a little, and I'm thinking, it sounds like a lot by everyone in this story.
Yeah, probably right.
I'm not sure, that's just,
Mhm.
did you know enough about the daughter in terms of looking at diagnoses that you were able to work with her in the best way possible, to not blur your role, to not have multiple relationships, to not be overly influenced by perhaps I think you said, or I got the idea, you felt sorry for her and you came into a protective role.
I think, honestly, I thought she had some dissociation, she dissociated a bit, but her PTSD honestly was so bad that she could hardly talk. She literally would shake. And so I focused on trying to stabilize her to get her stable from the trauma, before I tried to get up underneath all of that. And you're right, I kind of, bought into the whole story, what was going on. And, had I been able maybe to get a little farther, I would have been able to get up underneath it a little bit. But my initial goal was to stabilize her, to be honest with you.
Okay.
She was pretty shaky, very, very traumatized, for her symptoms were anyway. Yeah.
No further questions for now?
Right, and Ms. Akaye Badu?
Yes, thank you. How difficult would it have been to speak with the mom via telephone, Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. How difficult, and I think you've alluded to this, or you mentioned this, but how, in retrospect, and I know everyone have 20/20 hindsight, right? How difficult do you think it would have been to talk to the mom via telephone, carrier pigeon, smoke signals, or whatever?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think I probably should have, but every time I brought the mother's name up, she went into such a upset space that I kind of was biding my time, if that makes sense. It's like every time I asked, in fact, I remember one day we were in session and I basically pulled out my phone and said, well, let's just have the phone right here. I mean, honestly, I wasn't like against the mother or anything. I just was trying to get her through some of the trauma. So the father probably could have given me the number, but he too was so traumatized. I mean, I'm not trying to, over exaggerate. It's just they both were in very, very difficult emotional and psychological spaces. And so it was very hard. I think looking back, I should have just pressed for it. And I didn't, I think I really probably sided on the side of being protective and, biding my time. And, I think eventually we would have gotten there because it was my intent. I mean, I brought it up several times, to her. But when someone's telling you these stories about their mother, it's hard. It's hard.
Okay.
It's hard.
Also, and you alluded to this as well, how did you ever speak with the attorney, the father's attorney?
I never did speak with him. No.
Any reason?
I didn't, honestly, I didn't want to be involved. I mean, I didn't want to be involved in, the case, the custody case. I said I'll write a short little blip, so maybe in hindsight, I should have spoken with the father's attorney. It was all a lot of energy around this whole thing.
So I have two more questions.
Okay.
And this one is, and this has been mentioned as well, did you seek the advice of a colleague who had worked with, was involved with, or did you read the literature regarding custody cases on any level? Did you seek out any information regarding custody cases? While I know you didn't want to get involved, but the mere fact that the father had come to you in the manner that he had come to you, with the mother and the father not together, a child is involved. And did you ever think to?
Well, see, they came to me just to deal with her trauma. And so he had full custody papers. I was not even aware of the custody dispute until down the road. And so, yes, I think I should have. And that's where I'm saying I made my mistake. It was kind of like a slow slide. Nothing happens like in one big step. It was one little, and the next thing I knew, I was in hot water. And so that's why I said in my opening statement that I'm really more cognizant of, I'm looking to see foreseeable issues, down the road. And I did not do that well at that time. Honestly, the whole thing took me really off guard. So yes, I think I wish I had done that, but they didn't. They came to me literally just can you help her get into school? Can you help her be calm? Can you help her, manage her, symptoms and her anxiety and, her crying. And I did not even know that it was a bad custody case till down the road. I did not even know that. He had full custody papers, so,
And he didn't share any of this with you?
No, he didn't. He just shared that the mother had abused the daughter and he had kidnapped her and, all of this. But he didn't say anything about that they were in a custody dispute. And I took it face value, which I now know I need to do a lot more, getting information, but I took it at face value that when he had full custody papers and I thought the mother was in Chile. And so, that's where her native.
So last one, so you just looked at this little piece of the pie, this small slither, when they came to you and said, this is what she needs to be calm so that she can go to school and do well. And
Well,
so-
I think when you're, when you
that's-
start out with a new client, you have to kind of gather information as you can, and when your client can't talk very well, and I did bring the father in, and I had a whole session with him, and I did get information from him, but, when people are all frozen and in this fight or flight system, they give you limited information, or it took me a while to really get the whole picture, and so, and again, with her, the way her reactions were, it took me a while to kind of understand, what was going on underneath some of this. But, I mean, I appreciate your question. I feel like it was, I look back now and I say, oh my gosh, yeah, I would call the mom, I would get consultation, for, any kind of custody thing. I would do more research on it and find out what my, limits were and find out what I can and can't do. And, and that's where I made my mistake. And like I said, it was like a slippery little slope. And at first it was fine. There was nothing going on. I didn't even know that there was a bad custody battle until I was in it. And involved with her therapeutically. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, will you write these letters? And what do you mean, what letters? Just an update. And I'm like, okay, so. That's fine.
From the time that you saw the client, the patient, and the time that you wrote the letters, what was that time span?
It could have been up to a year.
A year? So
Yeah.
you were working with her for a year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you for.
Ms. Bernal?
Hi, yes, I just have one quick question, just from a continuity of care, because you mentioned she had been seen by another therapist in a different state. Again, just the father never brought existing, or informed consent, or you getting a diagnosis, a background from the other therapist? Did you get any information?
I did attempt to get that, but the mother had reported that therapist to the board as well, and so the therapist didn't want to talk with me, or there was something going on there that I could never get her to call me back. And so, anyway, so yeah, no, I hear what you're saying about the continuity of care, and I agree with it, absolutely. And I did attempt to get some understanding and what was going on. I did call. I left messages, but I never heard back from this therapist. And I found out later she was involved in a court case of her own with this mother. So, yeah. But I think I would try harder now. Definitely.
Dr. Horn?
Thank you. Just have 2 or 3 questions. So, you've talked about having things put in place, so let me back up just a second. What would trigger you now? What kinds of things would you notice that would trigger you to, excuse me, ask for a consult or?
Well, first of all, I would go into any therapeutic situation with a father and a daughter with treading very, very lightly. I think that would trigger me, number one. I mean, I think I would do my due diligence to understand what they were looking for, what they were wanting from me, and be very explicit about what I was going to give and not give. I think also inside myself, I now know that, I did feel really horrible for her. It was actually, I saw her 2 to 3 times a week in the beginning, and it was hard. It was hard.
So let's say, just using this example, when they first came in, and he had full custody of the child and showed you that full custody, you had no reason to suspect this was anything but someone who was very anxious, perhaps dissociating or whatever, and your
Right.
job was to help her calm down and
Yeah.
be able to go to school and do the kinds of things that.
Right, I eventually.
You had no indication that it was anything else,
No, well, no, I didn't have any indication that it was any custody dispute.
that there was anything more to it than,
Right.
I've got this.
Other than they did say that they had to leave the state because the mother was basically stalking them. And I just worked hard every session getting more and more information about what that looked like, what did that mean. And her time in Chile, there was a lot of abuse that went on, so that took a long time to get through some of that abuse. In other words, talking about it and processing it, and I did EMDR with her and did a few other things with her too. So.
No, I'm understanding that, but I guess what
okay.
I'm asking is then when do you get triggered?
Oh,
Because initially, you're doing all the things to really help her
Oh,
deal with her
yes.
trauma, right?
well, I think when the father started asking me to do things outside of what I originally had thought I was going to be doing and providing in my role, when he started asking me, could you write a letter? And actually, when the daughter asked me to if I could intervene for her with her PE teacher, which I did not do, but, they started asking me all these things to do. And I think that right then and there, that's when I started getting really uncomfortable. And I basically said, I'm very uncomfortable with this. I'm not sure that this is something I should be doing, or, inside myself, I was saying that. And so at this point, but I had written different kinds of letters like that when I was under supervision in Orange County. And so I said, okay, well, I guess, I can write this, and I can just present it to the IEP, and they can do with it what they want. But, now I know I would put at the bottom, I would put the limits to my opinions, that this is not based on data, talking to the mother, this is not based on data, observing anything else but hearing from the daughter. And I tried to do that, but I don't think I did it enough. I didn't understand, I think, the way I understand it now, what I would do, so.
Okay, so let me ask another question. You have said several times in here how you really felt for this girl. And when did you start to think that, wow, I lost my objectivity, or I really have been pulled in a way that.
Honestly, because I know that the Attorney General, wrote her whole thing, but, honestly, I guess not, when I wrote the letters, and they became more, and the father became more insistent about, having me do this, or having me do that, and having me do that, I think at that point in time, I started putting brakes on. I started, putting a brake on it, and by then it was too late. I mean, the mother had already filed she'd already, given me a subpoena, filed a complaint against me. And it was on Christmas Eve. Yeah.
So. Earlier, this is my last question, I think. You said earlier, you had never been involved in a custody situation before. You'd never done a custody evaluation, and I understand you didn't realize that that's what was happening until you were into, kind of into it.
Right.
At that point in time, you also didn't say, wait a minute, I need to get some consultation. This is outside of my,
Exactly.
really outside of my area.
You're absolutely right.
And when was it that it was like, oh my gosh, this is, Was it when you just felt like you were really pushed, just like you just said, the father was getting more insistent and stuff like that, and that's when you realized, wait a minute, I don't know enough about this, or I'm...
Yes. Yeah, basically it was, at that time, I needed to get consultation. It was an unfortunate set of circumstances as well. So honestly, if I'd been in Orange County, I probably would have gotten the consultation. I was very close to my colleagues down there. And, I do believe I called my old supervisor one time in it. And, basically he advised me I need to really get good consultation, and I was already in the whole process. So, I was brand new down there. So it was a little bit more difficult. But it doesn't deny my responsibility for that, and I totally get that. I do. I think I've just really grown and learned that you really have to have your accountability things into place. And at that point in time, I had a tragedy in my family, and it was a little bit hard. It was, to be honest with you, and I actually almost took a leave of absence at that moment. My husband got thrown out of a 4-story window, so it was a very tragic situation. But that doesn't deny me of any responsibility here, and I get that. It doesn't. And I think probably if I've learned anything is that no matter what happens in your life, when you hold that license and you're with a person, then you are responsible just as I was responsible for my family or whatever else was going on. And I do believe that very deeply. I do. And the lessons I've learned here have really, I think they've enabled me hopefully to be a much better psychologist and a much more mindful one in terms of, what I need to do, the steps I need to take, how I need to go about it, and honestly, not just with my thinking, but with my heart. I mean, with the self inside of me, because I had intuition. I had intuition that I let myself run over, and I kind of kicked myself for that.
So I do have one more question. So your probation, if it ran, its course would be over in January of this coming year, right, 2018?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions for you, because there's a few holes in some things that have been alluded to that I'd just like you to elaborate a little bit on.
Okay.
First of all, it sounds like you now live in Washington, is that correct?
Pardon me?
You live in the state of Washington now?
Yeah, I just moved up there recently.
And are you planning to come back to California?
I may. It's a long story.
Well, can you briefly tell me why you want to keep your California license?
Well, because my family's here.
Take a deep breath, but
Okay.
I'd like to know what
If
your
you won't
intentions
hold it against me, I'm going to cry. My husband had really severe brain trauma. It was a crime against us, and so I needed to get away. I needed to. He became very abusive, and he was, my soulmate, whatever. But anyway, it was a crime against us, and I felt the need to get some space, and I have family up in Washington too, and so it felt like the right decision for me. I wasn't healing down here. The rug kept getting ripped out from underneath me.
So a couple of times you've referred to a tragedy. This is what you're talking about.
Yes.
So can you tell me specifically when this happened and what
It
was?
happened about a month before I started seeing Antonia. Yeah.
And when was that? In 2010, or is that the period of time we're talking about?
2000. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in front of me, and I'm horrible at dates.
Okay, but it was before you started seeing the patient that we're talking
Yes.
about here.
Mhm.
But you only recently moved to Washington.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it was a long process of him healing. I mean, it took 3.5 years for his brain even to wake up from all the methadone that they put on him, and because it was a crime, and he got thrown out of a 4-story window, and he landed on a part of his head that has bony fissures, and it sliced through the part of the head that really had to do with the past and the past and the future and empathy, and he lost his ability for empathy. But by the time his brain kind of woke up on it all, then I had a whole nother round of with brain trauma and dealing with all of that. It's just easier to probably say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the patient. How old was she when you were seeing her?
She was 15 when I started.
And when you said the father was insisting that you write letters, what exactly was he asking for?
Well, he would just ask me over and over, just do this little thing, just so that, Antonia, just so that the lawyer will know what Antonia is going through, just so we can have symptoms, just write symptoms. Or, he would just try to pressure me into, being an advocate, and I would say, no, I can't play that role, but if your lawyer wants to know what's happening with her, either have him call me, and then he said, well, just write a little blip so I can send it to him, I guess, because the lawyer was in Arkansas, and, that was my mistake. I probably should have talked to him on the phone, or, I should have just figured out another way rather than writing a communication.
And I don't see the letters in the record. Can you describe
Oh,
what you did? I mean,
well, basically, I didn't talk about the mother. I just talked about that Antonia was in a bad state, that she was shaking, that she was still in a traumatized position.
But were these 10-page, very
Oh,
detailed
no, that was
reports?
like this big. Oh, no, it was
One
just like,
page?
it was just like this much.
Okay. And I think I heard you say that you have written letters for other patients when you were in Orange County. I mean, do patients ask you to write letters?
Oh, no, with this,
Is this
to
something
like
that
insurance companies, or I help somebody get on disability. So, no, it's not letters just to anybody, no. It's just, it was specific, like insurance companies or disability or things of that sort.
Okay. Ms. Lopez, any other questions?
No.
Any board members have any other questions that they didn't get a chance to ask? Dr. Stevens?
Yeah, I had one question regarding page 72 of the exhibits, which I believe is your LinkedIn profile.
I can't even get in on that, but yes, I'm glad you did.
You were licensed in what year?
2002? I forget.
That's consistent with both the records.
Yeah.
There are a couple entries here that indicate you were, sorry. There are a couple entries here that indicate that you were working as a clinical psychologist prior to 2002?
No.
Well, one says clinical psychologist 1996 to present. Another says clinical psychologist New Life Clinics 1994 to 2004.
But it also says DBA.
Doing business as.
Oh, I thought it was dissertation, I'm sorry. I'm getting a little bit flipped here. You know what, I haven't looked at this for probably 10 years.
Did you write this?
You know, I'm assuming I did.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned earlier that at the time of the emails or the letters, it was just the moment when, if you're receiving this in confidentiality, you shouldn't be forwarding it. That was sort of the idea behind of what you said. Based on the continuing education courses you've taken about ethics and et cetera, do you feel like that is sufficient related to what you've learned in those courses?
Oh, what do you mean by sufficient? I'm not sure I
That
understand.
that statement of confidentiality on that email is sufficient?
No. That's why I've redone all my records. I mean, I have 6 pages of intro records now, just because, to make sure that people understand my limits and my level of competence and my level of training. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes? Dr. Horn?
I have 2 questions. One, I'd like to follow up on the question that was just asked you. Sometimes when you tell people what your limits are, and you show them an informed consent, they may want to push the limits anyway. Well, could you just do this for my attorney? You see how my daughter is? I mean, whatever kind of thing like that. How would you respond to something like that now?
I would just reassert, well, first of all, I would honestly probably talk about my competence in what I'm trained in. I would talk about what I'm trained in and what I'm good at. And that is where I would reassure and reaffirm those limits. And I don't think I would have a hard time doing that at this point in time. I think it would come very easily to me. So did I answer your question?
Yep, you
Okay.
did, thanks. And one more question. I thought I heard you say that you made statements about the mother in your letters without ever having interviewed the mother or seen the mother or anything. But you just told us that you said nothing about the mother.
Well, that was to the one communication to the lawyer. When I did the IUP, or when I did the short thing to the school,
Yeah,
I said alleged in it, and I
Okay.
made it, but I still made statements about the mom that I would not do again.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
Understood. Yeah, that's it, thanks.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Go ahead.
I wanted to see if I could get more clear why you're asking to get off probation early.
Well, first of all, they told me to start in January to try to do it. But secondly, I am in Washington and I am flying back, and I think the more important issue for me is that I do feel like I've learned from what I needed to learn in this situation. I feel that I have grown enormously. I feel that my record keeping, my documentation, my valuing and affirming laws and ethics, and really practicing within those boundaries feels really good to me, and it feels like I'm a much better therapist and I'm much more on top of it. And you take ethics classes all the time, but these situations come up in your life, and until you kind of deal with them, sometimes you're not sure. You have to learn. And I feel that on the other side of this, I feel like I have learned about what I need to do, about the steps I need to take, and I think that this experience has really opened my eyes to just a larger picture of just what it takes to be a good therapist, and what it takes to be a better and better therapist. And it's not like I disregarded anything before, but I think now I feel much more adhered to what's important, and I understand why. I understand why. The last thing I would ever want to do is cause potential harm to somebody, and that would not be my instinct, but that happens. And did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
Your Honor, I just want to make sure, a couple minutes ago, you mentioned the patient's name, and we need to make sure it's redacted.
Oh, okay. I thought it was.
I did? I don't even,
Someone did.
I
so
didn't,
we
I don't
just need
even
to
know
make
the name of
sure-
it.
Sorry.
Well, I'm instructing the court reporter to use initials in any transcript that gets printed from the recording of this transcript. All right. Closing statements, Ms. Lopez?
The role that the Deputy Attorney General has in these cases is not really a role of an advocate. It's really a neutral role, but I can't help but be an advocate. So I just have a few comments about the hearing, but in the accusation at page 17, paragraph K, so this goes to whether Dr. Tanzi wanted to speak with the mother. And it says, during the entire time respondent met with the minor, she never spoke with Miss MCC on the phone or in person. In fact, respondent admitted that she wanted no contact with Miss MCC. Now, I'm sure now she realizes what a mistake that was, but I just needed to point that out. So in a hearing like this, it's the board's job to protect the public. And there's also rehabilitation of the psychologist. And it's Dr. Tanzi's burden. It's not my burden. So you have to look at, did she comply with probation, with the conditions, with the terms, and there's no question she did. This is in the exhibits. But really, that's very easy. You can go to classes, you can meet with your monitor. That's not the hard part. The hard part in these cases is rehabilitation and learning from your mistakes and being remorseful and taking responsibility. Those are really the things that this board needs to look at in determining whether to terminate probation early. And again, my role is neutral. It's not to argue whether she has met that burden. That is up to each of the board members. But those are things that you need to take into consideration. Are you satisfied that she learned? And again, this is not just an issue of record keeping. This is not just an issue of Dr. Tanzi writing letters and having the letters misused. But let's even stipulate that they were misused and she didn't know it. Really, the issue is acting in a forensic and clinical role and writing things about a person that she's never met. And again, I mean, according to her testimony today, she appears to have learned those lessons, but remorse, responsibility, rehabilitation, did she meet that burden? And I'll submit it on that.
Ms. Tanzi, what would you like to say in closing?
I agree with her. I think that's important. I think you have to decide what other rehabilitation I need. I'm more than happy to comply with that. And I have deep remorse. It's been, it's really, it's given me a whole new platform of life to really take a step back and to realize, you have, when you're in this role, you have to take this responsibility so seriously, and you have to really adhere. You have to portray. You have to position yourself. You have to have, you just have to have all your jot and tittle or whatever that word is together. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing. You need to know why you're not doing what you're doing, and you need to be very clear about those boundaries. And from that standpoint, I feel like that's changed the way I do therapy, the way I initially involve people in therapy. I have to say I'm a little bit more cautious with everything at this point. It's been a very big learning situation. But I agree that if you think there's more that I need to do, I'm more than happy to do it. I am more than happy.
All right, with that, we will conclude the hearing and go off the record. Thank you very much. So
Am I done?
you are done. You're free to go. Thank you very much.
I
And
just want to say thank you so much for listening to me and being gracious. Thank you.
thank you. All right, and I think we'll now go into closed session.
The board will now meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126C3 to discuss disciplinary matters, including the above petition, petitions for reconsideration, stipulations, and proposed decisions. We will be returning to open session, but only for purposes of recessing for the day. So if I were a member of the public, I probably wouldn't hang around, but it's totally up to you. And we'll be meeting again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in open session. This will take 30 seconds. So we're going back into open session. We will conclude closed session at some point during the day tomorrow in considering disciplinary matters. But for the time being, we are adjourned till 9 a.m. tomorrow.